Good morning. It's Tom Padula from TomPadulaTV on YouTube and Insegna Booksellers. Now, I've just come back from from Rosebud, and it's been quite interesting because, sometimes you forget a few things behind. Never mind. Well, we might forget something behind, like history, but is it a good thing? It's not. Because if we ignore history, we actually do not understand the present or the past or the future. Well, the past we won't know because if you're not interested in it, you're not going to find out. So the importance of history, sometimes it's underestimated in educational circles because, which history do you teach? And that's a real problem. Which one? Because there are a lot of histories, the histories of nations. For example, today I'm going to cover a topic called Pioneering Civilizations in Europe, Democracy, Art and Science, Alexander the Great. So in other words, in this particular chapter, we're looking at the moment, the time when the focus of empires, if you like, of kingdoms, of nation building, moved from the Middle East to Europe, and it was done through the Greeks. And the Greeks benefited from their invasion by Persia, because Persia was a very big empire in comparison to the small islands of Greece. But when you trade and when people want your land because for various reasons, you want to conquer the seas, you want to impose your will on small groups of people, really, because Greece had a lot of little cities, but they were not united. And then, because they were not united, each group, each city did whatever it wanted, of course. So that's the sort of lesson we learn. For example, at the moment, we've had with Europe, we after World War II, Europe became the move to unify Europe as a continent, and it sort of stayed there for quite a while, and it has benefited from it. Except then, after a few decades, you start looking at what is wrong with this, with the big ones, with the empires, because then the people at the top, if they don't respect all of their territory and they favour one group against another, and that's politics, really. But when that continues, then, of course, the seeds of division are planted. And, well, we've seen Brexit. I thought Greece and Spain and Italy, Portugal, or the smaller states of Europe would pull back, or the people from Eastern Europe, Poland and Hungary, etc. But they have benefited from the unification of Europe by having more freedoms, if you like, even though some people can question that. Some people say, we live a lot better under a dictator. Because, when things, they have the control and we blame them, but there's no blame because nobody can blame anybody. Otherwise you get you get fined or jailed or other worse things. So that's what we're looking at today. We're looking at this particular part. And the other thing that I'm going to look at is before the invasion, how did the Aborigines live? And we've got here, the family unit, and what have I got here? Families and groups of people, yeah. And then Banjo Patterson, I have the men who was away, and of course I'll continue with my visits from the Italian clubs for now. And there will be, I must admit, I went to Nepean Point here in Victoria, and it was beautiful. I didn't know that area, so I visited it and I filmed it, so that'll come on as well. So I'm very happy for that. And that's basically it. I hope you have had a look at some of my history lessons, presentations. You know, it's hard. This is today is the Thursday, the 5th of May, 2022, and it's program number 32. So here we go. All right. So let's have a look at what happens here. Greece gifts the world. That's the way, you know. Homeric poems composed around the 1000 BC, before Christ. The Iliad and the Odyssey. Olympic Games in Greece began in 776 BC, and they went on for a few centuries too. And then we picked them up a lot later in the last, in 1896, again, in modern times. Then there was the Battle of Marathon, and there was a period of golden age for Greece. The Battle of Issus, we're going to learn about that. The invention of the steam engine in Alexandria. Wow. And of course, we're going to be looking at Alexander the Great as well. So here we go. I think I need a bit of a drink first. Before we begin with these presentations here, and apart from the initial part, when I went into the areas in particular, you know, some people would have not heard of Sumerians or the Hittites of ancient Greece. So there are four things that we've got to remember about the Greeks. There are four good reasons why every educated person remembers Hellas, which is, as the Greek called their country, Hellas. So that you may remember them more easily, we shall tabulate them. Let's list them. The Greeks were the first civilized Europeans. That's undisputed. The Greeks were the first civilized people anywhere to practice some form of democracy. But not all the Greeks, only Athens. And maybe some other, but we only know that democracy began in Athens, a form of democracy, because the women weren't allowed to actually vote. So that's questionable too. 3, the Greeks were the greatest thinkers, artists and scientists of the ancient world. Well, we know, you name Pythagoras and all the others. We'll mention them all as we go along. The Greeks spread their ideas so widely among other peoples that Europe and the whole world are still indebted to them. Now, I've got some Greek friends, and I made the remark, if it wasn't for the Roman Empire, the Greeks would not be known as much as they are today, because when Rome then created the big empire that spread literally from from Asia into all of Europe and the northern part, including England. So, and the Greeks were the scribes for the Roman leaders because they could write, they had proven themselves to be great thinkers and also great instructors. So the people who then follow them in Rome owe a lot to the Greeks for their instructions. But if it wasn't for Rome, politically, Greece would have folded. So the fact that they were overcome by the Romans helped the Greeks' reputation. That's my take on it. Okay. Now, let's have a look at these 4 points. Civilization developed first in ancient Egypt. So, pioneering civilization in Europe. How did it start? So far, we have been reading mainly about the Middle East because it was in this part of the world that the wandering savages of the Old Stone Age first learned the arts of agriculture and husbandry. And so were able to settle down in permanent villages. Now, you might have learned of these villages grew into cities which became the centres of mighty empires like those of Egypt, Babylon, Assyria and Persia. and I mentioned Hittites, etc. But can I mention this? It's time that we start recognising as well that some of the empires that we don't talk about in our European-led textbooks were going on in Asia through China, and that the Maya in the Central America and the northern part of South America, there were the Maya, Aztecs, and Incas civilization that also made inroads, but they did not have an influence over other nations, and they sort of folded when then the Europeans arrived there 1500 years later after the birth of Christ. So these things need to be considered. And the other thing too, we have to consider the fact that in the northern part of Europe we had the Vikings, and that the Vikings also moved to Northern America. A few people did. So how do you populate the various continents? It's done through animals. The animals, wherever there was a possibility of migration, the animals went first. And then because of food, etc., the need for food, then people followed. And they did not write. They did not have the tools to create their own history. So that's why when we do what we do now, we are creating history for the future. The things that I did 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when I look at them now, I thought, God, that was another era. And I looked different. I did not look like this. But now, it's now. Now I look at myself and say, oh, who's that old guy there? I can't deny the fact that I am in the third age, whether I like it or not. I might feel differently, but people look at me and they look at what they see. And people are pretty good at telling the difference between a child, a young person, a teenager, etc., etc. We can't deny the facts, and that's what happens. But Europe has led the way since the Greeks. Okay, now that's where the bias comes in. The Greeks have led Europe since then. True and not true. It's a question of interpretation. For the rest of the book, you will be reading mainly about the peoples of Europe, and this book here talks about Europe a lot. For the last 2,000 years and more, and who have founded new civilization like their own in North and South America, in our own country and elsewhere. So when this book was written, I think they were thinking of the same thing that I'm thinking today, except that then, you cannot go and write a world history when you're covering certain topics in detail like this book does. And other books too. Before, there are a lot of history books that I've got. And I do, take bits and pieces out of that. But really the main thing for me is my own comments relating to history. For me, that's the important part, because when I read anything at all, I then bring my own brand of understanding. And I pass it on to you. And I might be prejudicial and biased or whatever. That's a possibility too. So it's up to you now to decide, I want to look at history a little bit more, and let's have a good thing about it. European civilization derived from Greece. Okay, he keeps on going about this. We may think of ancient Greece as a funnel through which was brought to Europe, and so to us, much of what was best in the cultures of the ancient East. But we must remember that the Greeks themselves added a great deal to the store of human knowledge before they passed it on to the West, more perhaps than any other people in history. All Europe has been to school to the Hellenes. True, but think about it, the Greeks were not a powerful empire. The Romans were. So that's what we have here. The map, now there's a map here, and I've got another map here. I want to show you the map of ancient Greece. There are two maps. I just brought one up. Let me see if I still have it. See? Amazing. Amazing. Look at this. That's the old one. Corinth, Athens, Thebes, and then Thermopylae there. That was a big story. And then here, look at this. Macedonia, Mount Olympus, Thessaly, Epirus, Aetolia, Boeotia, Thebes, Attica, Athens, Corinth, Argos, Delos, Argolis, Sparta is further south, Athens is further north. And then there's Crete as well, which we covered. And of course, very close to modern day Turkey. So, you know, all this land here, important part of the world. But then, the Ionian Sea joins to Italy and to Rome. So pretty close here, this part here, the Ionian Sea. That's, butts off Bari, Monopoli, where I've been, to Lecce, ancient cities. Okay, this is 750 to 500 before the birth of Christ. All right? So that's that. Now, of course, I'm going to continue with this reading here. The map on this page will remind you of what you read in chapters 10 and 12 about the ways which the Greeks became civilized. It shows too how they spread their civilization to Europe by founding colonies to the north and along the shores of the Mediterranean, especially in southern Italy. Yes, the Greeks did go to Sicily. Yes, the Greeks did go to Calabria. And they established cities like Syracuse, etc., etc. So we'll learn about this more. Why the Greeks lived in separate states and founded colonies. Greece is a small country with comparatively little good soil, but many good harbours. The patches of fertile land are usually cut off from each other by mountain ranges. Thus it was that, as the population grew, men took to the sea and founded colonies in neighbouring lands. The geography of Hellas also explains at least partly why the Greeks lived in separate city-states that were often hostile to each other. The idea of competition. And I just want to do the democracy, let's talk about democracy a little bit. Here we go. Athens, the first democracy. Of these city-states, the most important was Athens, and it was really the Athenians, not only the Greeks, not all the Greeks, who were the first civilized people to practice democracy. Democracy has been called government of the people, by the people, for the people. And today most people take it for granted that this is the best and fairest way of governing a country. But it was not always so. Democracy are known in Asiatic civilizations. You have seen that the early kings of Egypt and of the Sumerian cities like Ur were looked upon by themselves and by their subjects as gods. 3,000 years later, that great king of Persia, if not actually gods, were still mighty lords whose least word was law. Whatever they thought, bang, it became law. Until the Athenians showed the way, the very idea that ordinary people might be able to govern themselves hardly occurred to civilized men, not women, men, purely men. Now, Sparta was different from Athens. Sparta had a democratic military state. Sparta was a city-state which still held to these old ideas. It was ruled by kings and by a very small group of citizen soldiers. All the work except fighting was done by slaves or helots. The vast majority of the population who were forcibly kept in their places by the small band of armed rulers. Now think about this now. I've got something to say about Athens and Sparta, because I think our modern states use the two types of government to govern us. Spartan education for war. If a Spartan boy at birth appeared to be sickly, he was left on the mountainside to die. If he was strong and hardy, he was reared by, at the age of 7, he was taken from his parents and placed in a military boarding school, where the whole system of training was designed only to produce efficient soldiers. Spartan boys were even taught to rob skillfully so that they would be able to live by stealing food from the enemy in time of war. Stealing was okay, if you had to. The result, of course, was to make magnificent soldiers, such as those who died at Thermopylae, but the Spartans achieved little or nothing in art, science, architecture, or any other field of thought. Nor for all their warlike qualities did they make an empire or become rich. So, they were just soldiers. They followed orders from their bosses, from their generals, captains, whatever you could call them. But Athenian democracy, where there is freedom, there's a lot more creativity. Athenian democracy, very different was life in Athens. Every male Athenian citizen over 18 years of age had a voice in the government of their country, of his country, in other words, of Athens. Indeed, in some ways, Athens were more democratic than Australia is today. Oh, they were smaller, come on. Again, these people throw in a bit of a line there. Are we democratic here? We elect them and then we get rid of them when we want to. If they're smart enough, they get to be elected again. Instead of choosing representatives every 3 years to make the laws, as we do, the Athenians went frequently to an open square in the middle of the city. Yeah, can you imagine? 3,000 people now, 5,000, 100,000, where you might take part in the debates and help directly to decide what should be done. Well, we do that in the councils. You can go to council meetings. This is a privilege that Australians have only occasionally when there is a referendum. But a referendum is also cooked. It's presented in a particular way by the representatives. We must remember, however, that there were very many slaves in Athens as well. Slavery was there in Athens as well as in Sparta, as in the other city-states of ancient Greece, as in all ancient countries. And that, of course, the slaves had no vote. They weren't treated like humans. Well, if they were lucky, they had a good owner, then they had a good time. Otherwise, no. But they were all still slaves. Nevertheless, men will always be grateful to the Athenians for giving the world the idea of self-government. Okay? And, of course, ancient Rome had the kings, and then they also had republics. So that's it for today. We've looked at ancient Greece, and the idea, this from now on, we're talking about real knowledge that gets picked up through art and science and controlled by the military. Look at this. And the kings after these, this sort of started in Persia too, one or two good kings. They sort of encouraged the arts and the sciences. So the good leaders not only do military, but they also do arts and science, and they do defense. So they do the military part from Sparta and the democratic part from democracy, and then we add some of our own. That's what our democracy is today. Look at America, USA, Australia, Canada, all of them, New Zealand. We all have armies. We all have, soldiers, military. navies, the Army, the Navy, Air Force, and all allied industries relating to that. But we also have science. We also have the arts. And, it depends, depending on the type of environment we live in, some of these things come to the fore. For example, now, because there are too many people in the third age, the government is shifting towards looking after health. When I was at university, the idea was for Australia to defend itself. So defence was big. Controlling migration was big, and still is today. There's a lot. The health and education, yes, there were big departments too in government. So let's think about that. The next time we'll look at art and science, and we'll continue. So today, we did ancient Greece and Athens and Sparta. Okay, now we got to before the invasion. Okay, because that's important. And the groups, I began last week talking about families and groups. And if you remember, we talked about the dreamtime beings, dreaming or totem, which was usually an animal, bird, or other natural species. So in other words, the dreaming part had particular relevance to the people, to the indigenous people of Australia, because each group had their own totems. So let's, and they worked out, the groups worked, that they did not own the land, that they were part of the land. So the group sort of took over a section of the land where the totems were, where people died. The spirituality part became important in order to maintain the Neo village, if you like, the Neolithic village. But indigenous people, First Nations people, were nomadic as well, but within particular areas. So let's go on. A number of these local descent groups made what is often called a tribe, but more correctly a language group. So not only did they create their own tribes, but they also had languages that they shared, particular languages. Language is local. We develop different, depending on where you live. If you live in a cold country and it snows, 6 months of the year, you got different names for snow. But if you're in the equator, when it never snows just snow. Doesn't matter what type. Like when we study, if we don't know the countries of the world, we say, Asia. But Asia, there are 40, 50 countries. How come they're all the same? They're not all the same. And they got their own dialects in language. So language groups, important. All its members shared one language and one set of customs, beliefs and ceremonies, and law, in a way, underlying it all. They were known by the name of their language. So the First Nations people of this country are known by the name of their language, and presumably that name also extends to the land that they belong to. In Northeast Arnhem Land, the local descent groups or clans spoke different dialects of the same language. So again, dialects, a language within a language, a local language, slight variations. Like in China, there are many slight variations of, but Mandarin is the language, the written language, the national language, and therefore, even though you might write in Mandarin, you have the symbols, sometimes they're different. Like with us, with words, some words mean different things in different parts of the territory where that language is spoken. So, of the same language and were known by the name of their dialect, okay? Also, there are many areas of Australia where, though rights to land were everywhere inherited through males, descent was counted through females. Now, I don't know, let's have a look. In some areas of Australia, it was through his or her mother that a person inherited an important dreaming or totem, and this was critical in arranging marriages. So the females passed on the descent, not the male, but the male had the right to their own land. Interesting. For example, in northeastern South Australia, around Lake Erie, I've never said that. It's either Erie or Lake Erie. If one was a woman of the Emu clan, all her children would be Emu, and the children of her daughters would be Emu. But if her sons married women of the Cormorant clan, birds here, their children would be Cormorant and not Emu. But if their sons married women of the Cormorant, their children, so descent was through the female. And now we have through the male. But now they're starting to pick up laws in some countries where both male and female surnames will be attached to the child. And then you've got to work out what happens to the one after that. Also, most Aboriginal tribes were divided into named halves, quarters or even eights, depending on their kinship, relations to each other. These divisions and the kinship patterns told everyone exactly which persons they could marry. You couldn't just marry anyone, and also fixed the rules of behaviour. Wow. For example, when it was time for a boy to go through the rites of initiation, there were certain men in particular relationship to him who had the duty of looking after him and guiding him through these rites. Others had to promise him a wife. She would join him later on. If someone was injured, killed or merely insulted, then there were certain of his or her kin who were automatically responsible for righting the wrong or ensuring revenge. And that's common too through the Middle Ages, up to very recent times. The idea of, not forgiving other people is only modern. It's a modern idea. It's a Christian idea in a way, to the extent, but even in Christianity, the cultures in certain groups of people demanded revenge, even though they believe, the Christians say that you should forgive. Very hard to forgive sometimes. And through the courts, we can see that through the courts as well. Similarly, when someone died, certain kin automatically became responsible for the funeral ceremonies. The most difficult part of Aboriginal life to understand is the relationship of the people making up the groups, clans and tribes. But these kinship patterns seemed natural to the Aborigines, and they were learned easily by all Aboriginal children, because that's part of the culture. Everyone that they met fitted into the family group and clan pattern. Fathers, mothers, uncles, aunts, children and grandparents were expected to behave in certain ways to each other, and everyone knew these ways. No one was lonely or a stranger. Everyone had his or her place in Aboriginal society. It's interesting. That's what the book says now. You have to go and check it out in the behaviour patterns. That's the last bit here. Here are some examples of these rules of behaviour. Almost everywhere in Australia, a man had to avoid his wife's mother, as she had to avoid him. If she saw him in the distance coming towards her, she would turn and go another way, so that they did not meet face to face. In most areas, they were not supposed to talk directly to each other and had to send messages through a third person. You couldn't talk to your mother-in-law. Prohibited. In Western Animal Land, they could speak to each other if necessary, but they used a special language. A man who had to show his gratitude to his mother-in-law for giving him a wife by sending her a present of meat whenever he killed an animal. I'm thinking of you, thank you for the daughter. What if the daughter is not good? that didn't happen, no? A brother and sister played together as children, with the older one taking care of the younger. But when they grew up, they had to act very distantly to each other. In Arnhem Land, in other words, they wouldn't be independent. In Arnhem Land and in northeastern South Australia, they could not speak to each other or sit down together, brother and sister, when they were adults. But they were still very fond of each other and helped each other as much as possible. They can't talk to each other, but they can help each other. It's a bit complex. Brothers and sisters were always supposed to side with each other in quarrels. It didn't matter that your brother or sister were wrong, you still had to look after them. And it was considered very bad if two brothers or two sisters quarrelled, though this did happen sometimes. Of course it did. It still continues today. So, this is part of families and groups and the behaviour. So if you're of a One Nation person and you are coming to my, to these lessons, these presentations, I picked it up from authors who have contacts with First Nation people, with Indigenous people, with Aboriginal, and this was many decades ago. So, but some of these things here can be considered when you're looking at one's own culture. I, for one, in the early 80s, when I was teaching this, I really wanted to have Princess Hill Adult Evening School teach some Aboriginal language. And Emil Hamer, yep, he was all for it as well, but we could not get books. We didn't know much. It was, it was already too much doing everything else. But the time came, and now Aboriginal languages, First Nations languages are being picked up, and they are being helped by the alphabet that the colonisers brought in. That's how you have to be grateful for that, First Nations people. It's not all your way, but it's neither all other people's way. And I agree there should be in Parliament, there should be representations, not just of First Nations people, but also of all other groups. Even one person, in a big group, or make them important so that before the laws are passed, they go through the groups and see how it affects those groups culturally as well. And then, of course, there's a problem of predominance. Who do you follow? I don't want to say this, but there was when I was in when I was working with the VSL, and we started, languages, Kurdish and Turkish at Brunswick High, and there was also Hebrew and Swedish and, Hebrew. Well, somebody complained, why do you teach it on a Saturday? Why don't you do all the languages on a Sunday? And, the principal was very smart, really. he answered to the rabbi, he says, listen, mate, he says, on the Saturday it's your holiday, but on the Sunday it's my holiday. So whoever, but in the end, there was a compromise, and Hebrew was taught on Tuesday. So the VSL extended its reach outside of its own, its own name, basically. It's a beautiful story, and it's history, and that's how people should behave. When there's a problem, discuss it, and if there's disagreement, you've got to find a third way of doing it. Not your way, not my way, our way, where we both agree. It's never satisfactory, but that's how it is. Now, let's go to the colonists now, to our Banjo Patterson. And, you know, the poem here is only one page, so it's good. The Man Who Was Away. I really recommend Banjo. And there's also another friend of mine here. Will I show him to you? Yes, I will. 1 second. Henry Lawson. I'm going to come to you as well, Henry. I'm not going to get Banjo to, to be tops all the time. You will come to us as well one day. And of course, there are a lot of other Australian writers, good Australian writers too. Some of them have written volumes. Fantastic stuff. You know, we'll get there slowly but surely. The Man from Snowy River. No, not that. I didn't want that. I said, what's the name? It's page. Let me have a look. Banjo, page 24. Okay, well done. The Man Who Was Away, not the Man from Snowy River. We've done that. Okay, The Man Who Was Away. The widow sought the lawyer's room with children 3 in tow. She told the lawyer, man, her tale in tones of deepest woe. She said, my husband took a drink for pains in his inside and never drew a sober breath from then until he died. He was a drunkard. He never drew a sober breath. He died without a will. And I must sell the bit of land the childless mouths to fill. I've got to sell his land. There is some is grown and gone away, but some is childer yet. And times is very bad indeed. A living's hard to get. She couldn't feed her kids. There is Min and Sis and little Chris. They stops at home with me. And Sal is married green-hide Bill that breaks for Bingaree. And Fred is droving Conroy's sheep along the Castle Ray. And Charlie's shearing down the blend and Peter is away. All the people could help her, all away. The lawyer wrote the details down in ink of legal blue. There is Minnie, Susan, Christopher. They stop at home with you. There is Sarah, Frederick and Charles. I'll write to them today. But what about the other ones, the one who is away? You'll have to furnish his consent to sell the bit of land. The widow shuffled in her seat. Oh, don't you understand? I thought a lawyer ought to know. I don't know what to say. You'll have to do without him, boss, for Peter is away. But here the little boy spoke up, said he. We thought you knew. He's done 6 months in Goulburn jail. He's got 6 more to do. Thus, in one comprehensive flash, he made it clear as day, the mystery of Peter's life, the man who was away. So one was a drunkard, the other one is in jail. And you got a problem when it's like that, but yeah, a lawyer can go to jail and get the permission. I think that's a good one. Very good. Okay, well, as usual, I'll let my usual. I can't believe this. Every single week when I try to get my things, the computer just slows and closes up. Never mind. Let's see if it comes up. Yes, it does. Okay. Well, here we go. Last week we did. This was Solarino Social Club, and at Solarino Social Club we did. I showed Gervasi, Santa Gervasi, the Maddalena. Dua and Nea. There was also one of my, on the dancing floor, there was a lady there who said, I know you from your daughter. Your daughter's a friend of my daughter. So that's how it is. So let's see if we can. Oh, it's got to come up. The computer has got a mind of its own. There she is. Okay, I think we should be right now. Here we are. There we are. We'll start here. We'll continue from last week so that we can listen to the music. Okay, so that's one. Second one, another one, and here the dancing. That's good. Let's see if what's this one here. So that was the dancing part. I just want to check whether it's a photo or the video. No, it's yes, it was a video. I was right. Okay, so here we go. People enjoying themselves. And then we continue. And then you have to wait. There you are. There. And they form a little circle. And of course, then we continue with more of it. They have fun here in the clubs. And of course, then the music arrives. There he goes, Osvaldo. Good exercise. Good happy music. When people enjoy themselves, they keep going with the music. Fantastic. Wow, that's Solarino Social Club, and it's a wonderful place to be at because the food is great. The food is great. The atmosphere is very good, and generally in these clubs there is a group of people that go there every time, and there are a few new ones coming in. So there's a bit of renewal within it. But what's missing here? They used to have the children there as well, the families, but now these people here have got grandparents, so therefore they depend on their children to bring their children. but they were born here. They were born in Melbourne. Therefore, they don't identify as much with this type of activity. However, but they still maintain the closeness with their own, with their own elders, grandparents to their children, with food and a few other things. It's a bit of a mix. And in Italy, they don't have. There are some near the Pro Loco in the towns. They sort of have this sort of atmosphere too, but not as much as here. Here, it's really available to all groups. All groups that come from overseas start their own clubs. That's a good thing. So here we go. Let's keep going with this. There you go, ball and twist. And of course, Maria Formica there is the secretary, and she keeps on plugging away as well. Here we go. More music. That's Anna Maddalena, and that's Osvaldo. Very good local music, international. So Osvaldo tells me he sings in many languages. I've never seen the guys dancing in a club. The women, yes, but oh dear. They're part of the committee too, these two. But they have a good time. Well, that was quite interesting, really, because, generally in these clubs, the women dance, if they don't have partners, they actually dance with other people, but with other women. But the guys, not done. So that's how it is. So talking about the clubs and what should happen really is that this sort of knowledge that we have, this sort of social bonding, if you like, of people who come from different parts of the world need to be strengthened for peace sake. because, small groups outside of your own country have an effect from afar if things go wrong. For example, with our war now in Ukraine. Here at Mumbai, I filmed the Ukrainian group from Melbourne actually participating in the Mumbai parade. Now, you can imagine, and the Russians too, the Russian too, because when there's a war, both sides suffer. It's not that, and then I don't understand really why you would want to destroy all the things that have been built over a long time. And Mariupol, there were some old buildings there from centuries ago. All at once they destroyed a whole lot. But as I said before, in history, that used to be the case in old wars, when they hated the other side so much, or rather, when the government that was invading attacked the others, they wanted to get eliminated. And that's what Rome did to Carthage in Libya. And Carthage, of course, was a colony of current-day Lebanon, at the time. So that's coming up as well. And, history is a master. It has a lot of wisdom. We can really learn from it, and I think people should be able to access history in their search for knowledge, and I'm sure they do. But go a little bit outside of the normal. So. I think after I finish with this, with Greece, before I start with Rome, I'm going to go back to China and the Maya and have a look at some of the more, some of what they did during that time. Okay, so here we go. We've got a couple more, one more, I think. Yes, a couple more things. Here, let's go. Here we go. This one was right at the end. That was Roberta by Peppino Di Capri. Si organizza, Mr. Paro says, abbracciatevi. And of course the moment is captured by Maria Formica as well. This is towards the end of the night. Oh, I think it's the last song actually. Anna is from Solarina, was born in Solarina. You want a kiss? Huh? That was beautiful. What a great way to finish the night. Of course, you know, I have become, in a way, a bit of a friend with Osvaldo and Anna, because they're very good. They said, you can do whatever you want, Tom. You can film us as much as you want. I said, look, I'll do it, and I'll do it with great pleasure. Okay, so that's where we are. So I've got one last couple of photos of me and Osvaldo and Anna, and of course Angela as well. Here we are. There you are. There, nice photo. It was a good one. And that's it for Solarina Social Club. That's it. That was another one of the clubs. And I, attend there quite regularly because of Santo Gervasi. He sort of made me welcome, and I think, it's nice to see that there are people who follow these clubs in such large numbers too, and they're very interesting. And each club has got their own way of doing things, but each club also has different type of management, different type of people. Some people don't want to be filmed, some people want that, some people appreciate what you do, some people don't. It doesn't matter, but at the end of the day, the important thing in society is to have the diversity and to be understanding of it. And when people say no or whatever, that's fine, as long as one remains civil, most important. And of course you make your choices as a result. We tend to go, birds of a feather flock together. So you sort of tend to flock where the flock is, your flock. I was looking at the birds, and the birds do the same thing. The same birds flock together. So in other words, it depends. But in general, people then, including birds, they will go to where the goods are. Food, dance, all this. So, and we are very lucky in Melbourne. We have so many Italian clubs, Greek clubs, Chinese clubs, Vietnamese clubs. All nationalities have clubs. It's a strong point of Melbourne. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing all round. Now, I'm coming to the end of this particular presentation 32 of world history. And I just want to mention the fact that these podcasts are available on Insegna.com. I will be upgrading the latest podcasts in the next couple of weeks, and I'll bring them up to date. So, but check them out. I've been checking a few of them whilst I was away there at Rosebud, Borneo. And as I said, I was very lucky to see in a part of Victoria that was settled initially by the colonisers of Victoria in 1803, some of the early settlers, and there are some monuments there. What I noticed though, with those monuments, you could almost put another little monument of the, recognising the First Nations people alongside the colonisers, because they came in. They didn't come in. There were other people here. So therefore they should say as well, these were the early settlers, but this was the land that belonged to this particular group of Indigenous people. Now, if you do that all around Australia, that will be a big thing for local communities and for history as well. You're bringing the before the invasion history in line with the after the invasion history. And then we can move forward together because it's unavoidable. So recognition is important, even though initially there was neglect, sort of doing away with the other group of people who were here already. It's time for us to recognise First Nations people, Aboriginal people, Indigenous people, whatever you want to call them, alongside the history of this country from before the invasion. So let's do it. Okay, I'll leave on a good note. That's my thought, because I went on a 1 week, a whole week there, and I visited all of those towns alongside, from Safety Beach, Dramana, Macrae, and then Rosebud, Rye, Capel Sound, Rye, and Blairgowrie, and then Sorrento, and I got to Portsea. I was disappointed with Portsea. I didn't see there weren't too many shops there, just a few big houses, and then I went to Point Nepean. Oh, it wasn't a bad one. I will do more of it, and I will bring it to you next week in world history. Let's move to Victoria now, and let's keep going with the history that we're going to make together. Ciao, au revoir, arrivederci, alla prossima. Thank you very much for coming on or for watching me later. Very much appreciate that. From Tom Padula of TomPadulaTV on YouTube and Insegna Booksellers right from North Coburg. Yes, bye. And let's finish.